Hello, hello. Welcome to Courage Becomes Her, where we connect and share real life stories. I'll talk with women whom I love and am inspired by, women who are experiencing life just like you and me. I'm excited for us to gather together and cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in life and work.
We take things personally that aren't necessarily personal, like when you weren't thought of to be invited to something, or if someone is in a bad mood, towards you, we just assume, it's because of me, and what did I do wrong? And sometimes people are outright rude to us or passive aggressive towards us, and maybe they even mean it personally, but again, it's not personal. It's actually because of something going on with them. Like they are unhealthy in some way. And so having the presence of mind to differentiate yourself essentially from that person's behavior and to be able to ask in a healthy way, did I do anything to contribute to this? But sometimes no, the answer is just no.
That was Sharon Hodde Miller. I am so excited to have Sharon join us today for this episode of Courage Becomes Her. So Sharon is an Enneagram 7. She and her husband have been married for 14 years. She's the mom of 3 kids and the author of 3 books. She has a Master of Divinity degree and a Ph.D. in educational studies. She and her husband, Ike, founded Bright City Church, which is in the Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina area. And they started that church in 2018 and are co-pastors of the church together. Sharon is a passionate teacher about faith and culture and the Bible, and I invited her to join me today because she wrote a book a handful of years ago called Free of Me, and in that book she has a phenomenal chapter on friendship, and so we are continuing our friendship series by having Sharon join us today, and we're going to talk about what it looks like to be self-preoccupied in friendship. And she breaks that down and links it to insecurity, which is so fascinating and super helpful and insightful. And then she also talks to us about how we can reframe our rejection in friendship by seeing the woundedness of our friend, of the other person. And then we also just had this really great conversation talking about self-righteousness and shame and how those contribute to isolation and loneliness in friendship. And we kind of round out the conversation with a really lovely conversation and focus on safety and consistency in friendship and what that looks like, and is that even possible, or are those even possible? So I am just beyond excited to be able to have Sharon Hodde Miller join us today for this episode of Courage Becomes Her. Sharon, thank you so much for joining me for Courage Becomes Her. I am really glad to introduce you to probably some of the Courage Becomes Her community who may not know you, and to be able to let those who do know you get to know you even better today.
Well, hello, everyone.
Thank you. So we're going to talk in just a couple minutes about friendship and friendship rejection and loneliness and breakups and all of those different topics, which you have really just taken a keen interest in and thought a lot about over the years. But first, let's get to know you. So first and foremost, where is home? And tell us a little bit about home life.
Yeah, I live in Durham, North Carolina. So the Raleigh, Durham area, if people have heard of that area, it's kind of central North Carolina. And my husband and I have planted a church here. We'll be celebrating the 5-year anniversary this fall. So we've been leading a church together, and we also have 3 kids, age 10, 8, and 5. Our oldest is actually about to turn 11. So 2 boys and a girl, and they are very fun, very funny, very loud all the time. And then I also, write and speak and travel. So that's me in a nutshell.
I love it. So, so good. All right. What is a current obsession of yours in any genre, any category?
So one obsession that is not really current is Disney. I like love like, and by current I mean as in it's like just always been.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
like new. I love Disney. I grew up going to Disney World, and I love like listening to Disney podcasts, which up until a few years ago I didn't even know was a thing. That's kind of my escape, and I've actually had to hold back on it a little bit because there's it's like a hole that I could go down, but I really love everything Disney.
Okay. Yeah, I listened to Annie F. Downs and your conversation with her last summer when your The Cost of Control book came out, and you gals
Uh-huh.
kind of nerded out on Disney for a little
I
bit.
know. I
That
was
was
like, this
pretty
is how
funny.
Disney podcasts start, is you realize you really want to talk about this for like an hour.
Yeah,
So,
that was really, really funny. And I could see the two of you having a podcast together to talk
uh-huh.
about it. So,
Yep.
oh, so good. All right. What has made you laugh or filled your cup in the last few days or so?
My kids always make me laugh. They are very, very entertaining and funny. I was just hanging out with my 8-year-old a few nights ago, and he is such a character. And I had gotten him a slushie from Target, and the option was between lemonade and blue raspberry. And he goes, Mommy, have I ever told you I'm not that interested in lemonade? And I was like, no, why? And he said, it's just the lemon flavor isn't really crushing it. And I was like, okay. And then later he's just, inhaling this blue raspberry slushy. And I said, just slow down. You're going to give yourself a brain freeze. And he goes, I know, it's just so sunny and hot outside. You know, odds are odds. That didn't even make sense. And that was the whole like night with him. Like later I let him, even though he's 8, we had a short drive, and so I let him sit in the front seat as like a special thing. And he was
Mm.
looking in his side view mirror and he says, look at that handsome guy. So that is his personality. So my kids are a
Oh
constant
my
source of
gosh.
entertainment for me.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I love
Odds
it
are
so much.
odds.
Odds are odds. We will remember that one. Cute. All right. What's a best movie or show that you've watched in the last year-ish?
That is a really hard question. My husband and I watch a lot of movies. I just saw the Barbie movie.
Oh,
And have you seen it?
I haven't yet, but everyone who I've heard who's seen it has said it was really good. So
It was
curious to
really,
know.
it's funny. A lot of people are like, this is a great, feminist commentary. And I thought it was fine from that respect, but I thought it was very funny. Like I thought
Okay.
Ryan Gosling was very, very funny. So that's a movie that I've seen recently that I just really enjoyed.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Yeah, I mean, it definitely is crushing it as far as sales are concerned. So it's
Yeah.
got a big,
Uh-huh.
big following.
Hmm.
Okay, let's talk love language and Enneagram. So I have to tell you, I am a little bit surprised that you are an Enneagram 7. I totally thought, and obviously, I don't know you personally, but from a distance, I thought that you were either a 5 or an 8. And it sounds like maybe you weren't
5.
sure who you were for a little while or what yours was for a little
Yeah.
while. So tell us about your
Wait,
Enneagram.
why 5? I'm really curious about that.
The just the philosopher, the researcher, just
Mm,
very,
hmm.
intentionally focused on learning, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought you were going to say 3 because of my book, Free of Me. And that
Mm-hmm.
for a long time, I thought I was a 3, but my husband is a 3 and he's like a classic 3.
Okay.
But I thought I was a 3 and I thought I was a 1.
Hmm.
But the way I figured out I was not a 1 is I was talking to someone who's an Enneagram coach and was trying to figure out my number. And I said, I think I might be a 1 because I am very like justice oriented. And she said, well, do you have that inner critic then? And I said, no, not at all. Like I'm critical of other people, but I'm actually not very critical of myself. And so that was how I realized I wasn't a 1. But the thing that pieced together for me that I'm a 7 was actually, I was listening to Annie Downs, and she had done this Enneagram summer thing. And she was interviewing the 7s, and one of them made this comment about how he didn't really care about things until he really cared about things. Like he didn't feel urgent about things until he felt really urgent about things. And that sentence doesn't make sense unless you are a living, breathing embodiment of that, because that is how I have engaged leading our church. And it has been a problem because there have been times when my husband would say, hey, do you want to look at this branding for our children's ministry? Or do you want to look at this layout for this thing or this plan or this meeting agenda, whatever it is? And because it was not interesting to me in that moment, I would just say, no, it's fine. Whatever you pick is fine. Yeah. Until later when I see the branding or when I see the plan or the layout, whatever it is, and I realize, wait, this is not going to work. And then I'm like, what are we doing? We can't do this. And my husband's saying, I asked you about this 6 weeks ago. Like that was the time. But that was the moment where I realized, oh, like I also do this with our budget, our family budget, where my husband will want to meet to talk about our budget, but budget meetings are so boring and I hate them. And so I'll always say, no, like, it's fine. I trust you to handle our budget. Just tell me how much I can spend, and that's what I'll do. But then later when I realize, oh, we don't have enough money saved for XYZ, and then I'm panicking about it, he's saying, well, we could have talked about this at the budget meeting like 6 months ago. Yeah. And so I realized for me, it's boredom. That was the thing that pinpointed, this is I hate boredom. I constantly am trying to escape it. It's a problem like with staff meetings, planning, any of that. So I am an Enneagram 7. That also explains the Disney podcast. Yep. I love the Disney podcast. Totally. I do have an 8 wing. Yeah. And I think it comes out more in like professional settings, because I think you can have a different wing for different settings. I think I'm a 6 in relationships, but I'm an 8 in more like leadership settings. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. And it's so fascinating. Like each of us, I think, like a different journey on Enneagram. Like some people, it's just immediately like, I am this, and there is no question about that. And then others, myself included, like you, that it took a little bit of time and like thinking that I was something else before I, settled on it. So thank you. How about your love language? That one is a little bit trickier because I almost wonder if it has changed over time. But right now, I think quality time is the biggest one. I really enjoy time with my family. That's like the main thing that I really want to be doing with my life. It's just being with my husband and with my kids. But then also acts of service has become something that's especially how my dad really shows love. And I've noticed that it's become over the years just increasingly meaningful to me when he loves me that way, or my husband loves me that way. And so that's something that is really valuable to me. So good. So good. Okay. What was your first concert? So this is a good one for people of a certain age. My first concert was REM. Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah. Throwing it back a little bit. Right? I know. Like anyone under the age of, 30 would probably not care about that. But it was a really good concert. I bet. So, yeah. Oh gosh. Where did you see them? 8th grade or something. I grew up in Yeah. I grew up in Charlotte, and so
Uh-huh.
it was there.
Wow. Oh, so fun. So fun. Okay, you just were able to take a work sabbatical for the month
Hmm.
of July, and in
Hmm.
that time, you read a lot of books. So
Hmm.
tell us, and maybe the answer to this isn't something that you read recently, but what is a
Hmm.
book that has transformed your life?
So one book that had an impact on me in a way that I can't remember the last time a book impacted me was that I read over sabbatical was called When Narcissism Comes to Church.
Hmm.
And it, I not read it for a while because I think I misunderstood. I think I assumed it was just about toxic leaders who
Mm.
use spirituality to abuse. And it is a little bit about that, but it's much more about the spectrum of narcissism that
Hmm.
leaders are prone towards. And especially in the church, whenever you combine faith and power, that becomes especially
Yeah.
precarious. And so he talks about how not everyone is a pathological narcissist, but a lot of the characteristics of narcissism can actually lend themselves towards effective leadership up to a point.
Hmm. Hmm.
But after a certain point, it becomes toxic.
Mm.
And so reading this book, it really, I can't remember the last time I felt so personally convicted by a
Mm.
book. Just he was naming things that, again, aren't pathological in me, but I could see this isn't who I want to be. Like this is
Hmm.
not health. This is not good about me. This is not healthy about me. Like I needed someone to name it.
Mm.
And so I really felt convicted by that book and thought I need to reread this and these are things that I need to work on.
Mm.
And so
Wow.
that was a really I think it's necessary reading for pastors.
Hmm. That's good. That's good. I listened to his interview by Carrie Newhoff on Carrie Newhoff's
Yeah.
podcast, as well as the ladies of Saved by the City had a
Okay.
conversation with him. And I think both of those podcast interviews were so enlightening. Even I have, no connection to
Hmm.
church and church leadership
Hmm.
in that regard, but it was still just so
Yeah, the
informational.
one with Carrie Newhoff was the one that actually led me to read the book because I was
Mm.
so blown away by that interview.
Yeah, good. Well, I will definitely link the book as well as both of those podcasts in the show notes because, yeah, I think just helping to understand narcissism in leadership in general, whether
Hmm.
it's church context or corporate context, is so helpful
Hmm.
right now. So,
Hmm.
thank you. Well, thanks for letting us get to know you. I appreciate
You're
it so
welcome.
much. So, let's talk about friendship. So, I think one of the areas that I'd love to start is you have a perspective about friendship, several perspectives about friendship that have just been really enlightening to me and that I think are really informative. And I want to be able to have the Courage Becomes Her community learn from you. So, I think one of the things that you talk about, my words, not yours, is that basically like our self focus, our focus on ourself leads us to a place where we kind of have a lopsided view of friendship and making us think that
Hmm.
friendship is about us and that when maybe it doesn't actually have anything to do with us. And I think that
Yeah.
that is kind of just an unknown thought for a lot of people, or something that is maybe a little bit of a mysterious thought to think, okay, it's not actually about you. So help us see what you see in that, unpack that a
Hmm.
little bit.
Yeah. Well, let me back up and share just the premise of the book and like how I came to that. So years ago, I was wrestling with some insecurity around my ministry and around leadership
Mm.
and wasn't sure where it was coming from, but it was taking a lot of the joy out of work that had previously had inherent joy to it.
Mm.
And so I started trying to figure out where is this coming from? This must be about low self-esteem. And so I started reading a lot of the Bible's affirmations of me and what
Mm.
does God say about me and what does God think about me, and
Mm.
speaking those things over myself, reading books about insecurity, and just generally trying to affirm myself as a way to heal what was hurting inside of
Mm.
me. But after I did that for quite a while, I realized it had not helped at all.
Mm.
And I was really confused by this because I actually didn't have any trouble believing God's love for me and that he, had created me with a purpose and a plan and that I had gifts that were important for the world. I didn't have any problem believing those things either. And so I just thought, this is not getting at whatever is causing pain in me.
Mm.
And so I decided to, back up and kind of reapproach the problem. And when I did, and one book that was really helpful to me was a book by Tim Keller called The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And through that book, I realized that there are actually two causes of insecurity, but we really only talk about one. The first cause of insecurity that we talk about all the time is low self-esteem. And that is what I would arguably say is seeing yourself in a way that is not truthful,
Yeah.
seeing yourself in a way that is out of, sync with what God says about you. And so the appropriate response to that is the truth of scripture, what is true about you, essentially, like affirming what is good and lovely about you.
Mm-hmm.
But there is another cause of insecurity that we almost never talk about, and that is self-preoccupation.
Yeah.
And self-preoccupation causes insecurity because, as you just said, it makes everything about you. Everything is a referendum on you, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
your parenting or your job or your friendships. When you make it about you, like it's reflecting on you in some way, then it is constantly measuring, your worth in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
your approval, your acceptability, your value, your success, whatever it is. And so there is a sense in which when you make things about you that are not about you, it leads to this crippling insecurity in those situations. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the book, I look at different areas of our life that we wrongly make about us that are not about us.
Yeah.
And how when we do that, it naturally creates insecurity. And so the answer is to rightly orient those things back towards, for anyone listening who is a Christian, a person of faith, the first and second greatest commandments are to love God and to love others, to love God
Mm-hmm.
and to love your neighbor. And so all these things that God has given us are actually about orienting them towards love of God and love of neighbor. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we rightly orient those things back towards their created end, then it actually sets us free.
Yeah.
And friendship is one of those things.
Mm. So good. So good. That makes so much sense. So let's kind of transition to talk about rejection because you talk,
Mm-hmm.
obviously about that and kind of you say, and kind of going with, what you just said and told us and educated us on of it, not being about us. You say that 90% of the time it's not personal and that we look at these things that we think again are about us that are a rejection of us, not
Mm-hmm.
actually, being about us most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of peel that back a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about what your
Mm-hmm.
research found and your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I wrote that book, I think it came out in 2017. And so I have not thought about that chapter specifically in
Mm.
a while. And it's really interesting hearing you say that in light of some recent things that I have been processing.
Okay. Yeah.
Because when I wrote it, I was thinking more along the lines of we take things personally that aren't necessarily personal, like when you
Uh-huh.
weren't thought of to be invited to something, or if someone is in a bad mood, towards
Mm-hmm.
you, we just
Mm-hmm.
assume oh, it's because of me, and like, what did I do wrong? And sometimes people are outright like rude to us or passive aggressive towards us, and maybe they even mean it personally, but again, it's not personal. It's actually because of something going on with them. Like they are unhealthy in some way, And so having the presence of mind to say this, to differentiate yourself essentially from that person's behavior, and to be able to ask in a healthy way, did I do anything to contribute to this? But sometimes no, the answer is just no.
Yeah.
And so I've been working through some of that again as a pastor, just as a pastor, you do people's weddings, their funerals, their baptisms, you walk them through when their marriage is falling apart, and still you can be rejected by your people. Yeah. And I have really wrestled with that, because there is a part of me that wants to say, but if you cared about me, you wouldn't do that. There must be something wrong with me, or, why would you walk away? And so I've had to reprocess the reality that no, people aren't consistent.
Yeah.
The only person who consistently responds in love is Jesus, but nobody else does.
Yeah.
And so to be able to say, sometimes still, this is just me experiencing broken human love. But also one book that I read over sabbatical that was really helpful and dovetails really well with that book is by Henry Nouwen. It's called The Wounded Healer. And he talks about how important it is to see those wounds as a open door for healing, for other people essentially to experience healing because of the wounds that you have had. Yeah. And that was also a really good reminder, because I think as important as it is to, if you experience relational pain, it's really important to go to counseling. It's really important to process it on a healthy timeline and a healthy way. As I mentioned, low self-esteem, sometimes that comes from lies that you've started to believe about yourself. It's important to do all of that work.
Yeah.
But at some point, if you're just rehashing the wound over and over and over again, that becomes its own sickness.
Yeah.
And at some point, it is actually going to take you to that next stage of healing if you are able to ask, how could this actually serve others? How does this make me more tender towards other people's pain? How does this help me to see wounds, to see marginalization, to see rejection that I didn't see before? Yeah. And that for me has always been a really important step, so that I'm not just stuck in the muck of the I, me, why, because that takes you nowhere.
Yeah. That's so good. So good. I think it draws it back to the narcissism conversation as well, of just remembering that there is a need there. I think you say it in the book, a need to be loved, to be cared for, and that there's something going on under the surface for each and every one of us. Hello, friends. I'm just interrupting this conversation with Sharon super quickly for two things. First and foremost, please don't forget to share today's episode with a woman in your life. So maybe you have a friend who has been struggling with friendship, whether it's rejection or loneliness or isolation, or even some of the more difficult topics that Sharon and I are talking about, of self-righteousness or shame. So think about that woman in your life, and please share today's episode with her. And then second, I want to just remind you or let you know, for those of you who are newer, that the Courage Becomes Her podcast is brought to you by my coaching, Laurel Emery and Company. And I do have 2 openings for new clients in October. So if you are interested in potentially having coaching in regard to your personal development, your spiritual development, your leadership development, kind of any of those categories, please reach out to me for a free consultation, laurel@laurelemery.com. You can also check out my website, laurelemery.com, to learn a little bit more about me and my coaching. And I would love to hear from you and love the opportunity to work with 2 of you beginning in October. All right, let's get back to the conversation with Sharon. Kind of, you do talk about and share about, and I know even from, current personal situations as well, like there are times when it does lead to a breakup and, that there is something that is actually personal about it. So talk about like your experience of how to navigate through those times, through, the 10% or something that does lead to a friendship breakup.
So one thought that I've been processing a lot lately is I sort of flip between these 2 opposites whenever there's a relationship brokenness, essentially. Is either I feel self-righteous, like how could they, like I'm entirely right, they're entirely wrong. How could they treat me this way? I feel very self-righteous. But then I flip into shame, where then I think, well, what if I'm the one who's wrong? And like they're entirely right and I'm entirely wrong. And then I feel shame. And as contradictory as it sounds, with some of my closest friendships that have ended, I've gone between the 2, back and forth. Like and so I'm ping-ponging between either they were right and I am a bad friend and I'm filled with shame, or I am right and they are a bad friend. And how could they do this to me after the kind of friend I was to them? And getting to a point of realizing that neither one of those extremes is generally accurate. I mean, there are obviously situations in which, when you're talking about abuse or victimization of some kind, I think it's really important to say, like, if your spouse cheated on you or something like that, if you were abused as a child, there's no nuance. Like they are wrong. You are blameless. But in like adult relationships in general, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And what has really helped me, what has protected me from the isolation of self-righteousness, it's prideful, but it's isolating, is recognizing I was wrong. And what has protected me from the shame is also recognizing, and they were wrong. And those 2 things coexist. And theologically, again, like as a Christian, theologically, that is just good theology, that we are, the brokenness of creation runs through every single human being. And so in general, in most adult broken relationships, both parties are wrong and both parties might have some right as well. And so that truth has been really important for me to reflect on. So I don't just get stuck in the, like, either the shame, which is really paralyzing, or the self-righteousness, which is kind of inflaming.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. So good. Okay, so you brought up isolation, and in the book, you talk about isolation as it is combined with loneliness. And I know from sitting in the coach's seat for 11 years now, and just common sense, that it's really hard for some women to make friends, and that it's easy to be in a place of isolation. And I think I love that you shared a story of a prolonged season of, lacking close friends and having that loneliness. So kind of tell us about how you navigated that season.
Yeah, so the one that I wrote about was when we moved to Chicago, and my husband and I were newly married. We moved to Chicago. We didn't know anyone. And I assumed I was leaving a church where I'd been there for 7 years. I had really deep community. And I assumed that I would just pick up where I left off, like, and meet a group of girls, and we would just be besties. And it would just be like my Chicago version of that.
Yeah.
And that did not happen. And it actually never happened, like, while I lived there.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is that it takes so long to form deep friendships. Like we were there for 4 years, and right at the very end is when we started to form community with people that we really loved. And if we'd stayed, I think it would have become that. And some of those people I am still friends with, but it was very isolating. It was very lonely. Now, I'll tell you, because you coach a lot of women who are in leadership, what I've been processing since then is the added loneliness of leadership.
Yeah.
And that is, speaking of the Wounded Healer, he talks about, have you read that book?
I have. Yeah, it's incredible.
I thought I'd read it. And just for anyone who hasn't read it, I will tell you, you could actually skip most of the book. Do you remember that? Like,
yes. Yeah.
Goes on this meandering reflection on some things, but at some point he gets into, like, what do we do with our pain? And that was when I was like, whoa, this is really good stuff. And so if you're in a rush, but you want to get to this book, just skip to, 3/4 of the way through or something like that.
Yeah.
But he talks about how for leaders, there's a double loneliness. And he says there's the loneliness of just being a human.
Yeah.
That we all have the loneliness, like I just described, of moving somewhere new and you don't know anyone, you just had a baby and you never see your friends, whatever it is. There's like that normal loneliness. And then there's this extra loneliness of being a leader, which is especially isolating because a lot of the people that you are around all the time, they are not your peers.
Yeah.
And that is very lonely. Like, you can be very close to them and you're still not their peers.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I have really wrestled with that. But one thing that he said that was kind of new, because the approach I've been taking, which I think is important, is to become really intentional about forming friendships for this season of life. Because not all my friendships have been able to be with me through every season of life. And so I am in a season where I'm building new friendships that really are for this chapter. And I've had to be intentional. Again, it's been very, very slow. But the other thing that he has said that goes back again to reorienting that pain outward is he talks about you have to essentially make peace with that loneliness. And you have to learn to be at home in your own house, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's only when you are able to be at home in your own house that you're able to welcome other people in. And thankfully, because of Jesus, he helps us to be at home in our own house. And there's so much you could dig into there, just even in our like modern understandings of identity. But I thought that was a really interesting, he basically said, like, the loneliness is not going to go away.
Yeah.
It will always be there.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out, yes, have community, have people who know you. Who know everything going on with you, who you can be vulnerable with, but also there will always be this loneliness, this side of eternity. And so you need to, with Jesus, learn, how can I be at home in my own house? And then once I am, I can actually welcome other people in and let them heal in my presence, is essentially the way he explains it. And I really loved that.
Yeah, it is. It's so true. And it's so good. Like, at 3 o'clock in the morning when we wake up and have that, that loneliness wash over us, there's no one that can come to us in a way that Jesus can.
Yeah.
So you talk about that of Jesus being the perfect friend. And I don't know that we necessarily understand like what that actually means necessarily. So how do we embrace Jesus as being our friend?
Yeah. One truth that I am newly learning because of the last several years of ministry, and, you don't even have to be in ministry to relate to this, but there are certain people in your life that you think this is a long haul friend, or this is someone that I can trust implicitly. This is someone that I can bare my soul to, and they will always be careful with my heart. And I've had a couple friendships in my life where I thought that was the case, and then I got hurt. And for a while, I was asking the question, what do I do about that? Like, how do I find people who are safe enough for me to open up to, especially as a leader, as a pastor?
Yeah.
Maybe not in my own church, but like who are other people that are safe people so that I can be vulnerable, because it's good and healthy to be vulnerable. And I realized one day there is only one safe person, and that is Jesus. Nobody else is safe in the sense that they will never hurt you.
Yeah.
Even people who love you really well. I mean, my husband is great. He's a wonderful husband. He studies like being a husband. Like he's so, thoughtful and works really hard on his own self. He loves me really well, but he still hurts me.
That's right.
All the people in my life who love me best, it's not because they've never, ever hurt me.
Yeah.
And so that was helpful for me in having appropriate expectations that, first of all, vulnerability with anyone but God entails you're opening yourself to pain.
Right.
Like it's going to happen. That's why it's called vulnerability and not just transparency. It's the risk of pain. But the only one who will never hurt us is Jesus. And that has been really helpful for me and really encouraging, because I think when you realize everyone will hurt you, that could easily flip into cynicism. But to say, no, that's just the nature of being a person.
Yeah.
But that's why we have Jesus. It's why he is healing all things.
Yeah.
And so to know you always have a safe person, and it's Jesus.
So good. So good. So good. So we have one final question that I ask all of our guests. But before I ask it, I will say you have most certainly been inspiring courage in me over the last couple of years as I've watched you walk through the pandemic and being a leader through the pandemic. And you talk about it openly in your newest book, The Cost of Control, which we don't have time to talk about today. But I think it's just been obviously a really difficult time for anyone leading a church, for people in the medical field, just all of these different areas. And that has really, the way that you have faced it and the way that you have talked about it has really been courageous. And so thank you for doing that. I appreciate that so much. So my question to you is, who or what is inspiring courage in you right now?
So I just read a book that I hesitate to mention it because it's could be like a little bit controversial, but I'm just answering the question honestly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
So I mentioned this actually in my favorite sabbatical reads. There's a book called Losing Our Religion by Russell Moore. And for anyone who is not familiar with Russell Moore. He was an enormous figure in the Southern Baptist Convention and was really mentored by some of the presidents and seminary presidents. And, he was as like Southern Baptist as it gets. But in the last several years, there was a great parting of the ways where the SBC, some of the leadership, aligned itself with a political party, and he did not.
Yeah.
And that cost him greatly.
Yeah.
And so he wrote a book that just came out within the last couple of weeks where he talks about like what happened and what it taught him about being a leader of courage and of conviction and not making compromises, in really standing on the foundation of Jesus and his teachings and holding to them with integrity. And at the end of that book, I cried my eyes out. I was really surprised I had that kind of a response, because he, at the end of the day, he said that what was so disillusioning to him is that he felt like the people that taught him all of these things that he'd based his whole life on, he said, I feel like I discovered that they didn't actually believe those things.
Yeah.
And that was really devastating. But where he came to was this place of realizing, and yet many of the things that they handed to me, even though they handed it to me with sort of like broken handles, the thing itself was still true.
Yeah.
That Jesus still holds. And the gospel is still good news. And it was so, for everything that he's been through, it was just so hopeful and so encouraging. And so that was really, really encouraging, because people like him, people like Beth Moore, I mean, they have really counted the cost. And that's the thing about courage, is it seems so glamorous. It seems so romantic. Like you want to be the person that people tell the story about who had courage.
Yeah.
But the problem is, to be that person in the thick of it is horrible.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yes. Yeah.
Having courage is very painful. It's not romantic. It is not glamorous. In the middle of it, it does not feel good at all.
No. Yeah.
And so it's very, very painful. And so it was just a good reminder. I think courage is contagious.
Yeah.
And so whenever you're around other people who stand by their convictions with courage, it helps you to do it as well. And so I really was inspired by that book.
So good. I haven't read it yet, but I've looked it up and it just looks incredible. So, well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with us today and being vulnerable about some of your friendship and relationship challenges and struggles, and sharing your insights with us.
You're so welcome.
I am so grateful for Sharon and her insights around friendship. And I love that she closed us out with this reminder about Jesus being the perfect friend, and that he is the only one who is safe. He is the only one who consistently loves us. And if you want to understand that more or want to learn more about that, I know Sherry talked about it in last week's episode as well. But Sharon's book, Free of Me, really does go into that a little bit more deeply and helps us to understand, like, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like to have a friend in Jesus, to be friends with God? So definitely get the book if that is something that is kind of gnawing on you, or, something that you're kind of just wondering about. I loved the overall book. Obviously, the friendship chapter was just one of the chapters and one of the areas that she focused on. But for those of you who follow my reading list, you know that I have read and reread that book, Free of Me, multiple times, and it has really been very helpful and freeing to me to learn just a new perspective of taking the focus off of myself, not looking for happiness through my reputation or the opinion of others or success in general. So definitely a book worth getting. If you don't know about Sharon, I do encourage you to follow her and connect with her, whether that's through Instagram or her website. Both of those are linked in the show notes. I am consistently being challenged by her. That's why I thought she was an Enneagram 8, just learning from her consistently. Her latest book, The Cost of Control, an absolute must read for pretty much all women everywhere. I hear it all the time in my coaching sessions about our inability to stop trying to control things. You heard Sherry talk about it in our conversation last week about, even trying to control our friendships. So that book is incredible and very much worthwhile for you to get and to read as well. So that is linked in the show notes for you also. So thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation with Sharon, and we will be back next week with another conversation about friendship. What an honor to help you to cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in your life and work. Thank you so much for inviting me to journey with you. I look forward to being back with you next week, where we'll hear another story from a woman whom I love and am inspired by and look forward to learning from.